In 2021, Tessica Brown ran out of her regular hairspray, so she tried using Gorilla Glue spray instead. Her hair then became stuck to her scalp for more than a month, despite hundreds of attempts to wash it out. Brown says she felt so helpless that she stopped eating and lost more than 10 pounds over a short span. Eventually, a plastic surgeon performed a 4-hour-long surgery on her for free to remove the adhesive. Once described as a genius, Russian man Anatoly Moskvin was a well-respected linguist and historian until he was discovered to be living with the corpses of 26 girls in his parents' home. He apparently dug them up from local cemeteries before mummifying and dressing them like dolls. Anatoly's parents were well aware of the dolls but had no idea they contained real human corpses. After his arrest, Moskvin stated that he had great sympathy for the dead children and believed that one day they could be brought back to life through science or black magic. He's been forced to live in a mental hospital since 2012. Known for his historically cruel behavior, Roman Emperor Nero accidentally killed his pregnant wife by kicking her to death. He then found a young boy named Sporus who looked exactly like her, castrated him, then married him. Nero would call the boy by his deceased wife's name and dress him in women's clothing, while making his court play along with this disturbing act. The unsettling relationship would come to an end when Nero died in 68 AD, but this was only the beginning of the boy's suffering. For the next 3 Roman emperors, Sporus would serve as a royal sex slave. One of these horrible emperors, named Vitellius, planned on humiliating the boy in a public performance. Pat Morita, the actor who played Mr. Miyagi, spent the first 9 years of his life in a hospital due to tuberculosis. After undergoing extensive surgery and finally learning how to walk, he was sent to a Japanese internment camp in Arizona. During the 4th century BC in Nordlingen, Germany, this 9-year-old boy became severely disabled following a leg infection, was killed by a blow to the head, then thrown into a grain silo that was reused as a garbage pit. A Queen's Guard horse named Obelisk used to lure in pigeons by dropping oats from his mouth. When they got close enough to him, he would brutally stomp them to death. Obelisk was eventually sent away for additional psychological training. Considered one of the greatest strength athletes of all time, Icelandic powerlifter John Paul Sigmarsson once famously said, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift." A few years later, at the young age of 32, he died of an aortic rupture while deadlifting in his gym. In 1986, 21-year-old Christopher Thomas Knight ran out of gas in rural Maine, entered the woods, and lived there for the next 27 years without human contact. He survived by committing over 1,000 burglaries against houses in the area to be able to endure the harsh winters of Maine. Knight was eventually captured by a game warden and sentenced to 7 months in jail, later vowing to live normally and to never steal again. Christine Palillo was a bullied outcast at school until 2 popular girls befriended her and gave her a makeover, helping her achieve the title of Miss Irresistible from her school's student body. But just a few months later, Christine and her drug addict boyfriend would end up brutally murdering the girls and 2 others in a botched drug deal. One of the girls tried desperately crawling to her phone after being shot in the groin, until Christine bashed her skull in with the butt of her revolver. Serial killer Dennis Rader used to install security systems for homeowners. Many of his clients wanted the security systems to keep the BTK killer from ever entering their homes, unaware that he was in fact the one installing them. In 2017, Glenna Durham killed her husband after shooting him 5 times. Soon afterwards, the couple's pet African gray parrot started repeating the words "don't effing shoot" in the husband's voice. These were assumed to be the husband's last words, and the woman was eventually found guilty of first-degree murder. In 2009, Florida woman Carol Bryan received facial fillers that were mistakenly injected into the wrong spot, causing her forehead to swell up so severely that she went blind in one eye. Carol went from a fashion model to a recluse, refusing to leave her home for years due to the monstrous appearance of her face. Medical students in the UK were recently left astonished after the autopsy of a 78-year-old man. He unknowingly lived his whole life with 3 dicks, an extremely rare condition known as supernumerary penile formation. Polish adventurer Alexander Doba kayaked solo across the Atlantic 3 times, once at the age of 70. 4 years later, he reached the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, sat down for a break, fell asleep, and never woke up. In 2009, 2 women bet 28-year-old Russian man Sergei Tuganov $4,300 that he couldn't last 12 hours in bed with them. He won the bet, but later suffered a fatal heart attack after consuming an entire bottle of Viagra. Often called the world's youngest political prisoner, in 1995, Gendun Chukinima was chosen at the age of 6 as the next Panchen Lama, the second highest authority of Tibetan Buddhism and the selector of the next Dalai Lama. But 3 days after being chosen, the boy and his family were kidnapped by the Chinese government and haven't been seen nor heard from in nearly 30 years since. In 2004, a deranged fan rushed the stage during the first song at a Pantera concert and fatally shot legendary guitarist Dimebag Darrell multiple times with a pistol. He then killed 3 others attempting to subdue him while injuring 3 more before being shot in the head by an officer. The killer's motive remains unclear to this day. During a live firing demonstration in 1942, a Royal Air Force pilot accidentally opened fire on a crowd of spectators. 25 British soldiers were killed while another 71 were wounded after being mistaken for dummies. After his floppy trouser snake was torn off in a car accident when he was 6 years old, 43-year-old Mohammed Abad received a fully functional bionic 8-inch pecker. It was constructed over a 3-year period using skin grafts and is complete with a mechanical interior and a fluid pouch to give him erections at the press of a button. According to the surgeons involved, its function is still complete enough for Abad to be able to father a child with his still intact right nut. This woman was caught on camera doing something deeply disturbing to win a chess match. Earlier this year, Russian pro chess player Amina Abakarova apparently needed a way to knock her opponent out of a tournament. So she decided to go to the extreme and poison the woman, 30-year-old Ume Osmanova, in what's being treated as an assassination attempt. Amina poured mercury from a thermometer onto the victim's chessboard before her next match and smeared it all over her side of the board with one of the pieces. Osmanova said she began feeling unwell during her match 30 minutes later, complaining of sudden severe nausea and dizziness, prompting an immediate call for medical assistance. After the security footage was reviewed by authorities, Amina had no choice but to confess to the murder attempt. Osmanova ended up making a full recovery, as the attacker was banned from future chess competitions and stripped of her previous titles. Abakarova now potentially faces several years in Russian prison for the senseless attack. Found in a jungle cave in 1867, a feral boy named Dina Sanichar preferred eating raw meat, had trouble standing on 2 legs, growled like a wolf, chewed on bones to sharpen his teeth, and never learned how to speak. He eventually became the inspiration for Mowgli in the Jungle Book. In 2016, 11-year-old Nebraska girl Lulu Gilreath was going on her first carnival ride when it quickly turned into anyone's worst nightmare. Her hair got caught in the machinery of a spinning ride at a carnival, and her scalp was almost completely torn off. The horrible accident damaged both of her eyes and nearly killed her. After World War II, Japanese General Hitoshi Imamura was sentenced to 10 years in prison after failing to control his unit, which committed horrible atrocities toward Allied soldiers. Believing that his own sentence was too light compared to the men under his command, Imamura built a replica prison in his garden where he stayed for decades until his death in 1968. According to Hinduism, the Yamuna River is considered a river of heaven and is believed to cleanse the mind of sin. Every year, thousands of people drink from and bathe in the water despite its toxic foam, which is the result of poorly treated sewage that's constantly dumped directly into the river. Various chemicals in the foam are known to have many negative health effects, including skin irritation, hair loss, breathing issues, and brain damage. Earlier this year, a former model and Miss Switzerland finalist was allegedly murdered by her husband, who then reportedly dismembered her body and pureed her remains in a blender. In 1947, there was a case in Louisiana where a young man failed to die during a botched electric chair execution, so his lawyers tried to argue that he had already been executed and that it was cruel to go through it a second time. After much deliberation, the Supreme Court eventually ruled against him, and the man was successfully executed by electric chair the next year. In 1978, Hustler magazine owner Larry Flynt was shot in the spine by a white supremacist serial killer, who was apparently outraged by an interracial photo shoot in one of the magazine editions. Flynt survived the murder attempt but was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Years later, Flynt pleaded for his attacker to be spared from execution, saying, "A government that forbids killing among its citizens should not be in the business of killing people itself." But with up to 22 total victims and the desire to start a race war, the serial killer was eventually put to death by lethal injection. Around 1:30 a.m. in August of 2021, a woman wearing only a bra and leggings was captured on a trail cam in a remote North Carolina forest. 3 hours later, she was captured again, this time walking much slower with a noticeable limp. 6 months later, the woman's remains were found in the same area, still wearing the same clothing. Despite all efforts to identify her, the woman remains a complete mystery to this day. The double rainbow guy Paul Vasquez was a constant uploader on YouTube and created thousands of videos. Even though he died of an illness in 2020 at the age of 57, he scheduled 15 years of uploads in advance before he died, leaving his channel still very active now, 4 years after his death. This is the tragic transformation of Florida man Robert Hardester, who was arrested 9 separate times for various infractions over an 8-year span. British doctor Thomas Kwan recently attempted to murder his mother's partner in one of the strangest ways possible. He disguised himself as a nurse and knocked on the man's door to offer him a free COVID jab. But instead of the vaccine, he put an unidentified poison in the syringe and injected it into his stepdad's arm. The next day, the man experienced serious pain and blistering in his shoulder, prompting him to go to the hospital and having part of his arm removed. He ended up surviving the bizarre attack, and Kwan was charged with attempted murder. In 2015, Caitlynjenner rear-ended a 69-year-old woman at a red light who was thrown into oncoming traffic and fatally struck by a Hummer. Jenner claims the paparazzi was at fault for the crash after constantly stalking the reality star and pulling up too closely to Caitlyn's car. The case was settled outside of court as Jenner avoided any charges for the tragedy. Shoes discovered in the wreckage of the Titanic are often found in pairs because they were worn by the victims when they died. Their entire bodies disintegrated, but the shoes remained intact due to protective oils in the leather. In 2012, Nigerian businessman and polygamist Yoroko Onaja died after 5 of his 6 wives forced him to have intercourse with each of them. They were apparently jealous of the attention he gave to his youngest wife and threatened him with knives, demanding he sleep with them. Onaja managed to have intercourse with 4 of them, but apparently had a heart attack and stopped breathing before reaching the 5th. Last September, 39-year-old Florida mom Kathy Griffith was brutally stabbed to death by her teenage son Colin. He called 911 saying, "I had a very, very long fight with my mom. She fell on a knife and she's bleeding from the neck." Police arriving at the scene described Colin as showing zero emotion, and the first thing he said to them was, "I know my rights." This all transpired just 1 year after Colin was charged with fatally shooting his divorced father Charles, but was released on the claim of self-defense. Kathy trusted her son at the time and even bailed him out of jail. Leading up to Kathy's murder, Colin had reportedly threatened to kill his mother many times, but she continued to love him unconditionally. He was said to be a very spoiled child who had been in and out of mental facilities for years after being diagnosed with PTSD. According to reports, Colin developed this after being held captive by his father for over 1,000 days without human contact upon telling his dad that he was gay. Colin has been charged with first-degree murder, as prosecutors have described him as a violent murderer who must be kept separate from civil society. In November of '99, the girlfriend of Panthers wide receiver raecarruth was shot 4 times and later died in the hospital. It was soon determined that her NFL boyfriend had hired a hitman to kill her after she reportedly refused to abort their baby. The baby ended up surviving, and Carruth went to prison for 19 years before being released in 2018. During a tense pro basketball game in 1992, Serbian player Boban Jankovic was frustrated with a foul call and slammed his head into a padded concrete post. He immediately dropped to the floor and was never able to walk again after badly damaging his spinal cord. Earlier this year, 44-year-old Pennsylvania man John Matthew Chapman was sentenced to life in prison after driving his girlfriend across the country and luring her into a Nevada desert for a bondage photo shoot. He then bound her to a signpost with zip ties, taped her mouth and nose shut, and watched as she died. American actor and model John Eric Hexum was once seen as the next big thing in Hollywood due to his charming looks, charisma, and radio voice. But in 1984, he died on the set of the TV show Cover Up after accidentally discharging a blank cartridge into his skull. Hexum had apparently been playing Russian roulette with a prop gun during a break in filming, and the muzzle blast caused enough blunt force trauma to fracture a piece of his skull that propelled into his brain. Serial killer Israel Keys went the extra mile to ensure that he would never be detected. He had no preferred victim type and never killed in the same area twice. For one murder, he flew to Chicago and drove 1,000 miles all the way to Vermont in a rental car, then used a murder kit he'd hidden there 2 years prior. When shopping on his murder trips, he always kept his phone turned off and only ever paid in cash. But Keyes was caught in 2012 after using a victim's credit card when he didn't have any cash on hand. Morbid Facts, Part 407. Nicknamed the Princess of R&B, popular singer Aaliyah lost her life in a tragic private plane crash when she was just 22 years old. Despite being warned that there was far too much wait for a safe flight, she and her entourage were eager to return home and demanded to leave immediately. Shortly after takeoff, the plane lost its balance and crashed just 200 feet from the runway, killing everyone on board. In 2013, the body of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was found inside of a rolled-up gym mat at his Georgia high school. Authorities later concluded that he had become trapped upside down while trying to retrieve his shoes, and eventually died from positional asphyxia. In 2002, schizophrenic British artist Richard Sumner entered a remote forest in Wales. He apparently handcuffed himself to a tree and threw the keys out of reach. His skeleton was found 3 years later, with evidence suggesting he likely regretted his decision. This elderly couple just agreed to be euthanized. Former Royal Air Force engineer Pete Scott and his retired nurse wife Christine have signed up for a double SUI pod in Switzerland, where voluntary assisted SUI has been legal since 1942. The pair made the decision after 80-year-old Christine was diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia. Married for 46 years, they plan to die peacefully together in each other's arms with the help of the sarcophagus pod. This controversial death capsule works by replacing air with 100% nitrogen, which quickly renders the occupant unconscious and fully stops their breathing within 10 minutes, resulting in a swift, painless death. As stated by Pete, "We have had long, happy, healthy, fulfilled lives, but here we are in old age and it does not do nice things to you. The idea of watching the slow degradation of Chris's mental abilities is horrific to me. Obviously I would care for her to the point I could not, but she has nursed enough people with dementia throughout her career to be adamant that she wants to remain in control of herself and her life. Assisted dying gives her that opportunity, and I would not want to go on living without her." In Connecticut, 1986, 39-year-old flight attendant Helly Crafts was brutally murdered by her husband Richard after she caught him cheating on her. He then put her body through a wood chipper and ground her remains into a lake. Richard was sentenced to 50 years in prison but has since been released. Today would have been the 50th birthday of Iranian filmmaker Babak Karamdan. In 2021, he was murdered by his parents in an honor killing for still being single at the age of 46. Babak's parents confessed to drugging and stabbing their son several times, later stating that they were proud of their actions and showed no remorse. A Canadian man getting a rectal exam by his doctor at the hospital was observed by people he assumed were medical students, but he ended up suing the hospital and the observers after learning they were actors who played doctors on the TV show Saving Hope and were trying to prepare for their roles. A man from Alabama recently died after having the wrong organ removed during a horrific surgery in Florida. 70-year-old Bill Bryan was scheduled to have his spleen removed, but the surgeon mistakenly removed his liver instead. According to medical records, the surgeon didn't realize his mistake at the time and proceeded to label the removed liver specimen as spleen. Liam Neeson's wife, actress Natasharichardson, was taking a beginner ski lesson on a bunny hill when she suddenly fell without a helmet on. She initially refused any medical help but complained about a severe headache a few hours later. Richardson was soon flown to the hospital where she died 2 days later from a brain bleed. A park ranger on Rinka Island once sat down in his office and was attacked by a Komodo dragon hiding under his desk. Turns out the cleaner had accidentally left the door open the night before and the massive lizard snuck inside. The ranger received 30 stitches at the hospital and managed to survive, but has since quit his job and now suffers from PTSD. Harvard Law School professor Roger Fisher had an interesting idea to prevent the unjustified launch of nuclear weapons. He proposed implanting the U.S. nuclear launch codes inside a person's body next to their heart, so that the president would have to take a life in order to activate the country's nuclear weapons. George Lopez has a genetic condition that caused his kidneys to slowly deteriorate. So when he needed a new kidney in 2005, his wife Anne gave him one of her own. A couple years later, George reportedly cheated on his wife, then divorced her in 2010, all while wearing her kidney. The first scientist to observe penguins engaging in gay intercourse, grape, and necrophilia was so disturbed that he tried to obscure his findings to prevent people from knowing the truth about penguins. In 1995, a substitute school bus driver in Illinois stopped at a red light with the back part of the bus still on some train tracks. The children were screaming for her to move the bus forward as a train approached, but she was confused about what they meant. The train struck the bus at 60 miles per hour and 7 children were killed. In 2018, Gloria Williams pleaded guilty to posing as a nurse to abduct Kamaya Mobley from her mother's arms in the maternity ward. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison, the same length of time Kamaya was separated from her birth family. Nicknamed the Nuclear Boy Scout, David Hahn was a teenager from Michigan who was obsessed with nuclear radiation. When he was only 15, David attempted to build a nuclear reactor in his backyard shed, using radioactive material from household items including vintage clocks, smoke detectors, and gun sights. Within 2 years, David had built a functioning reactor which gave off enough radiation to be detected throughout his entire neighborhood. David was soon caught by police when they found hazardous materials in his car during a routine stop and thought he was building an atomic bomb. When David's shed was raided by the EPA, they determined that his project had created dangerous levels of radiation, leading them to dismantle the building and classify it as hazardous waste. This mugshot from 2006 shows David covered in sores as a result of his extensive exposure to radiation. This, combined with continuous legal and mental health issues, led to David's early passing at the age of 39 from an accidental overdose.